On the left side of a Boeing 737 MAX 9, just behind the wing, there's a panel that looks like ordinary cabin wall, a window, a stretch of sidewall, identical to the rows around it. From outside, under the paint, it's something else. A plug. It fills an opening that becomes an emergency exit on airplanes packed with extra seats, and on airplanes with fewer seats, it simply seals the gap. Alaska Airlines didn't need the exit, so this airplane was built with the plug in place and the wall closed over it. The plug is held by a fairly simple idea. 12 stop fittings around its frame carry the pressure. When the cabin is pressurized in flight, the air pushes the plug outward against those stops, and the stops hold it there. The plug is not bolted against cabin pressure at all. It only comes free if it can first slide up a fraction of an inch, just far enough that the stop fittings no longer catch it. 4 bolts, 2 near the top and 2 near the bottom, exist to prevent exactly that small, upward movement. Nothing more. They carry no flight load. The airplane pressurizes and depressurizes thousands of times, without ever asking them to do anything. They exist for a single condition that, in ordinary service, never arrives: the plug trying to move up. They are the kind of part that does nothing at all until the day it is the only thing that matters. On the airplane that would later fly as Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, those 4 bolts were not there. The airplane was new. It was built at Boeing's factory in Renton, Washington, the plant where every 737 is assembled, and it came together the way they all do, in sections, on a moving line, handed from one team to the next. The fuselage itself arrived from a supplier, Spirit Aerosystems, with the door plug already installed. When it reached Renton, workers found a problem near the plug, not with the plug itself, but with the fuselage around it. Several rivets on the frame just forward of the plug were defective and had to be replaced, and the plug was simply in the way. On September 18th, 2023, it was opened, which meant removing the 4 bolts so it could lift up off its stops and swing aside on its hinges. There was no other way to reach the rivets. This is where the ordinary part of the story ends. Opening a mid-exit door plug wasn't routine work. Boeing had specific technicians trained for it, and when the plug was closed again the following day, none of those specialists were on duty. The closing fell to others. The rivets had been repaired, the plug was shut, and the bolts were not put back. What should have stopped the airplane from leaving in that condition wasn't a person. It was a piece of paper. Boeing's process required a removal record, a document created the moment a part like the plug comes off, stating what was removed and what has to happen before the airplane can be signed off. That record is what triggers the final inspection. It's the thing that forces a second set of eyes to confirm the bolts went back in. No removal record was ever created. The plug had been opened, but on paper, it had never come off. And because the paperwork showed nothing required anyone to look. The closure was never inspected. The airplane moved on down the line, and that autumn was delivered to Alaska Airlines, carrying a door plug that, on paper, had sat untouched since Spirit shipped it from Kansas. Alaska Airlines took delivery in late October 2023 and put the airplane into service a couple of weeks later. For about 2 months, it flew an ordinary schedule, mostly short hops up and down the West Coast. In that time, it made 154 flights and logged 510 hours. No maintenance was done that required anyone to touch the door plug, and as far as the airline knew, there was nothing about it to check. But the plug was no longer held the way it was meant to be. With the bolts gone, nothing stood in the way of it moving upward. The 12 stop fittings were still there, still carrying the pressure, But they only did their job as long as the plug stayed seated against them, and every flight worked quietly against that. Each time the airplane climbed, the cabin pressurized and the plug pressed outward against its stops. When it descended, the pressure bled away and the plug eased back. Flight after flight, with nothing pinning it down, the plug crept gradually upward, a matter of fractions of an inch across all those cycles, never quite returning to where it had been. There were a few signs in those weeks, though none that pointed here. On 3 occasions, December 7th, January 3rd, and January 4th, a cabin pressurization warning light came on in the cockpit. Each time, the crew switched to the backup system, reported it, and maintenance tested it and reset it. The pressurization system itself was working as designed, and investigators later found no evidence those warnings had anything to do with the plug. The plug could only rise so far before the stops would no longer hold it, and it had been climbing toward that point since the day it left the factory. It would come down to one more climb. On January 5th, 2024, the airplane took off from Portland a little after 5 in the evening, bound for Ontario, California, with 171 passengers and 6 crew aboard. About 6 minutes in, climbing through about 14,830 feet, the plug reached the end of its travel. It rose past the stops, and the pressure inside the cabin did the rest. The plug blew out into the dark. There was a loud bang and a rush of wind. Oxygen masks dropped. The cockpit door flew open and slammed into the lavatory. A teenage boy seated in the next row had the shirt pulled off his back. Where the plug had been, there was now a clear rectangle of night sky, about 2.5 feet wide and nearly 5 feet tall, with seats right beside it. Those seats were empty. 2 passengers had been assigned to them and had arrived too late to make the flight. The crew put on their masks and turned the airplane around, and within about 20 minutes they were back on the ground at Portland. 1 flight attendant and 7 passengers had minor injuries. No one was killed. By now, the how was clear. The why, how a brand new airplane could leave the factory missing 4 bolts without anyone noticing, is the part of this story almost no one hears. Following a failure back to the moment it was built is the whole reason this channel exists. If that's why you're here, subscribe. The rest of this is the why. The plug came down in the backyard of a physics teacher in a suburb west of Portland, who found it 2 days later. When investigators examined it, the cause was no longer in the airplane. It was on a factory floor in Renton. The 4 bolts had not torn loose in the blowout. They were already gone, taken out when the plug was opened for the rivet work the previous September, and never put back. What the investigation spent the next 1.5 years establishing was not who to blame, but why nothing had caught it. The answer was that nothing was built to. Opening the plug was supposed to generate a removal record, the document that forces a final inspection. None was created, so no one was required to look at the closure, and no one did. A second safeguard, a separate paperwork step, was misapplied, in a way that might also have surfaced the missing bolts. It didn't. And the instruction that governed all of it, the one telling workers when a removal record was needed, had been known to be unclear and error-prone for at least 10 years. When the NTSB delivered its conclusion, it didn't put the accident on whoever left the bolts out. It put it on Boeing, on the training and oversight meant to ensure that a disturbed installation gets checked before an airplane flies, which here didn't happen. The FAA, the board found, had failed to catch the same systemic problem for years. By the time the investigation closed, most of what happened in those 2 days at Renton had been reconstructed. But not who opened the plug. No one on the door team could say. no removal record was ever made, and the 4 bolts were never found. Every machine has a part like those 4 bolts, something that does nothing for years, until the day it is the only thing that matters.